This is the Comics Alternative Interviews, a conversation with Luke Howard. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Comics Alternative Interviews. I'm Derek, one of the two guys with PhDs talking about comics. And on this interview episode, I have the pleasure of talking with Luke Howard. His book, Our Mother, recently came out from Retrofit Big Planet Comics. But before we get to that conversation, I want to let all of you know that this episode of the Comics Alternative Interviews is brought to you by the wonderful folks at Discount Comic Book Service. Go to their website, dcbservice.com, for all of your comics pre-ordering needs. There, you're going to find all DC, Marvel, Image, and Dark Horse titles at 40% off of the cover price if you pre-order. For all of the other publishers, you'll find that their discounts are 20 to 35% off of the cover price. And every single month, you're going to find some wonderful specials. Sometimes those specials will be at 45% off cover price. Sometimes you can find them at 50% off cover, but often you can find discounts that are quite a bit more impressive than that. And if you go to dcbservice.com right now, you'll be able to find Luke Howard's latest book, Our Mother, at 30% off of the cover price. You only pay $6.30. This is a great book, and you can't beat the great deal. So that's Discount Comic Book Service. You got to go to their website, dcbservice.com, for all of your comics pre-ordering needs. And after you do get your comics there, please be sure to send them an email and tell them that the two guys with PhDs sent you. When I was at Small Press Expo last month, I had the pleasure of meeting a lot of different creators. Unfortunately, one of the people that I did not get to meet in person was Luke Howard. And one of the things I found out in the course of our interview, which you're about to hear, is that Luke was tabling right next to Dakota McFadzean. And I had even interviewed Dakota for the podcast during that event. So I feel bad that I didn't get to meet him, but I did get in touch with Luke afterwards and asked him if he wanted to be on the podcast to talk about Our Mother, which had just recently come out from Retrofit Big Planet. And he said yes. So this was great. Not only did I have the opportunity to talk with him about the new book, but I also had fun talking with him about a book of his that came out in June that I really liked, Talked Dirty to Me, and this came out from AdHouse. And in fact, this was a book that Andy Kunka and I had considered reviewing on a regular review episode of the podcast. We never got around to it for whatever reasons. I can't remember the detail. But now I get Luke Howard on the podcast. I finally get to talk with him about his books, Talk Dirty to Me and Our Mother. So let's go ahead and take a listen to that conversation. I have the pleasure of talking with Luke Howard. His latest book, Our Mother, was released in August from Retrofit Big Planet. And then also earlier this year, he had a book from AdHouse, Talk Dirty to Me. Luke, welcome to the Comics Alternative.
Hey, thanks for having me.
You know, let's begin by me apologizing for not meeting you at Small Press Expo a few weeks ago. We were talking right before I turned the mic on, and you said that you were there right beside Dakota McFadzean.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great person to be right beside at something like SPX. Yeah, I mean, there's no fault on either of us. There's so many people to meet at SPX, so much going on. I feel like I barely got a chance to get from behind my table.
Yeah, but it was through that brief interview that I did with Dakota that you and I began to communicate, and after SPX, and then bring about this interview, because I think I had tweeted out something about the SPX interview with Dakota, and you responded, and I can't remember exactly what it was that you said, but kind of poking fun at Dakota, and then I did the same, and then I thought, I really like Talk Dirty to Me and Our Mother, so let's do an interview for the Comics Alternative.
Yeah, I think I said Dakota should never be trusted, and I still maintain that is pretty accurate.
Oh, but anyway, it is good to have you on the show, and we don't have the loud ambient noise of the con behind us.
Right. We're not going to be shouting.
Right. Let's talk about, I guess, of the two recent titles, the more provocative, and that is Talk Dirty to Me. Now, this was released when, in June of this year?
Yeah, it was a debut at TCAF.
Okay.
So maybe more like May, technically. And then more wide, like hitting the stores in June. Okay.
Now, the title, as I mentioned, is provocative. And also on the cover, you have at the bottom a graphic novel for mature readers. Do you think that this is a risque graphic novel?
I don't particularly. That's a fine line. I talked with my editor, Chris Pitzer, who's the founder of AdHouse, for a while about, how much do we need to disclose up front that this has some sexual content in it. And I think we kind of settled on the fact that there should probably be some notification that there's, mature content in the book. But at the same time, I'm not someone who's particularly worried about putting work out there that addresses things like sexuality. Personally, I grew up very exposed to media, movies and books and stuff from a pretty early age that address those issues. So for me, just even having that conversation about, like, is this safe to put out, and do we need to put warnings and that kind of stuff, felt like new territory, because it's such a something I'm so comfortable being exposed to.
Mm-hmm. And when I read the book, or after I read Talk Dirty to Me, I thought that maybe not so much the title, although that's part of it, but also the way that this was being explained to the potential reader is something, and I don't mean this in a negative way, like a marketing ploy than something that tells us about the content, because I felt, and I think it's effective in that way, but after finishing the story, I felt that, this is not so much about the protagonist's work, as short-lived as it might be, with a phone sex business, but it's something much larger going on.
Yeah, I think that is the struggle I often have with my stories is there's some kind of conceit, like in this book, Emma is working or trying to start a job at a sex hotline, but it's pretty inaccurate to say it's about working at a sex hotline. Although, some of the early press releases that we had out there did, kind of like highlight that more. And probably because that's just like an easier way to describe it than the sort of rambling way I would describe it if I were sitting pitching it to you, because it's really much more of a personal and kind of aimless journey of this character Emma, more than it is specifically about a sex hotline or anything like that.
Yeah, I mean, even the blurb on the back by Rutu Modan, I think, is provocative as well. Now, she writes, "Talk Dirty to Me portrays an original, honest, and very funny point of view on feminine sexuality without being vulgar or using politically correct cliches. The comic manages to be ironic and touching without giving up eros." Yeah, I mean, I agree. But as the story continues, it's, that whole erotic part, sexuality emphasis, seems to take a back seat to more tender concerns, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's very true. I think it's framed in these issues of sexuality or sexual repression, but I think that is a lens by which the story is seen through. But kind of underneath that, what is really at the heart of the story is more about Emma trying to figure out, what it is she wants and how can she be a more confident person, or can she be a more confident person?
Yeah. So when you have tried to explain this to people who haven't read the book, what would be your pitch of Talk Dirty to Me?
I say that Emma Barnes is moving to a new town with her husband. She's following him because he just got a new job, and for once in her life, she's not having to work to put her husband through grad school or something like that, and so she's suddenly been given this opportunity to figure out what it is that she really wants. But that prospect itself is overwhelming to her, to the point where she feels like she's flailing. And so she gets this idea that maybe she can try something like randomly working at a sex hotline or something like that, just to kind of deal with the frustration of the overwhelming possibilities of finding something that you feel passionate about. But really underneath that, I think it's more about what it's like to grow up with sexual repression, and what it's like to be an adult that, whether it's about sexual repression or just confidence in general, what it's like to be an adult that's trying to be a more confident person than they actually feel capable of being.
And one of the things I really enjoyed about Talk Dirty to Me and what you do with Emma, and you do this in your other comics as well, I just think that it comes to the fore in Talk Dirty to Me, is how you get into the character's mind and in an almost fantastical way change the narrative according to how they're seeing their situation at a particular time. And that first hit me when I guess soon after Emma and her husband moved to, is it New York?
It's kind of
a big city.
Yeah, I sort of picture it as Chicago, but I think it's just city.
Okay, so they moved to a big city, and that first morning that they're there, he has to, after them sleeping on the floor because their stuff hasn't arrived, they're sleeping on the floor. He leaves for work, and so she's home alone, and she's looking out the window, and there's a guy walking by and looks up. And we see him transform into this giant figure who then begins to talk with Emma as she's looking out of the window. Now, we know that realistically this is not happening, right? She's not looking out a window. A guy walks by and all of a sudden he transforms into this giant so he can talk with her.
Right.
But that's from her perspective. That's what's going on inside of her. And we have this happen frequently throughout the narrative. There are a number of flashbacks where we find out some of the backstory of Emma and growing up. And then there is the rather long part, I guess, after the middle of the book, where she apparently, it seems, becomes famous for being a phone sex worker and writing a book about that. And, so we get to see reality transformed from the character's perspective, which I think has a big impact when we contrast it to the situation that the character is actually in. And again, we see that in other comics of yours as well, but I think it really is prominent in Talk Dirty to Me.
Yeah, I think I'm very, very interested in the idea of trying to capture what something feels like versus what something actually is. I think there's this magical thing that comics can do where you have the license to sort of escape reality whenever you want, and go into this more emotional place with a character without it feeling as contrived or cliche as it might be if it were in something like a film, or even a prose piece, because there's something about the visual language of comics that really allows us to be willing to go into kind of fantastical places. And that's always been a focus of mine when I'm sitting down to make a page of comics, is where does this beyond like what is actually happening, the kind of 3-act structure of a story, that sort of traditional way of approaching story. I'm just as much trying to meditate on what is a character really trying to what am I trying to communicate that this character is feeling underneath the reality of the situation. And often that usually results in these sort of like bizarre exaggerations, because there's this sort of emotional part that is trying to communicate something more extreme, because how we feel inside is way more extreme than what we show on the surface.
Now, this is, and correct me if I'm wrong, but is this your longest story that you've told, Talk Dirty to Me?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, because I know that you have written a number of other comics, and I think if our listeners go to your website, andsothen.com, then they can find many of the ones that maybe have been published elsewhere, but you have them up digitally, like Trevor, Dance Yourself to Death, Parasite. And in fact, two of your earlier stories, Trevor and then Dance Yourself to Death, didn't those originally appear in Dog City and Irene, those anthologies?
Yeah. After I graduated from the Center for Cartoon Studies in 2013, I started focusing that first year out of grad school, trying to do as many anthology things as I could. I did a number of Irenes. I was, in that Dog City one. Those are all... And the Mabel Key one that Talk Dirty originally came from, those are all anthologies that are, connected to or started by people that also attended the Center for Cartoon Studies.
So, I mean, that explains some of those connections. Now, how did AdHouse come about?
AdHouse came about because Chris, at this point, I was working at the school. I was a faculty member at the school. And I also run the Visiting Artists program, which at the Center for Cartoon Studies is like it's a weekly thing. We have a new artist that comes in every week, someone working in the comics industry, and they'll give a lecture and answer questions. And then once a year, I run this sort of larger thing that happens over the course of a couple days called Industry Day, where we have actual industry day people come down, publishers, agents, that sort of thing. There's usually a panel one day where they give advice and just talk about the nature of the comics industry, the future of comics industry, whatever. And then they also give portfolio reviews to students. And Chris, that's how I met Chris. I was sort of organizing the event, just getting to know all the visiting lecturers that year. And Chris was someone that I really jived with. Afterwards, I sent him comics, because I really admire AdHouse. I think that they put out great books. And so I said, I just want to send Chris some of my comics and as like a thank you, and also, maybe put myself on his radar one day. And from there, he received my comics and he read them. I think I sent him Trevor and this other story called Junior, and which are both on my website now. And he got back and said, hey, I liked your stuff. If you ever want to pitch something larger, I'd be interested in seeing it, even if it doesn't end up being something that works for us. And that's sort of how that whole conversation got started.
So this being your first longer form work, did it give you a taste to work in that way, or do you still prefer to work in shorter form storytelling?
It definitely gave me a taste. I think when you read Talk Dirty to Me, you can see that I'm still someone who thinks in vignettes. even though it's, a longer form thing, it breaks the whole 100-page, count. It still has this feeling of chapters or going in between different elements, back and forth often. Part of that is because it was released as a part of the Maple Key anthology. So it was a chapter would get released each issue. And so there were over the course of 6 issues. And even though I ended up editing it pretty intensely and redrawing a bunch of stuff and adding about, 40 more pages, that sort of created that sense of smaller stories within a larger story. So to answer your question, I think I'll always be drawn to the idea of chapters or vignettes or something like that. But I definitely want to continue to do longer stuff.
But it was your shorter work that I think got you your first notice. What was it, in 2014? Trevor was nominated for an Ignatz Award in the Promising New Talent category.
Yeah, that's one of those things where, they list Trevor, so I assumed that was sort of what caught people's eye. But it's also that kind of more ambiguous Promising New Talent category. It's kind of a little more ambiguous than like Best Mini Comic or something like that. Mm-hmm. But yeah, Trevor, that short comic, I was very surprised that caught people's eye because it seemed like such a silly, over the top story. But I was very honored.
Well, how did things change after that nomination, if at all, in terms of the attention you got?
I don't think there was a lot of change out there in the world. I don't think it was one of those things where like suddenly I had way more Twitter followers or suddenly publishers were like knocking on my door. I don't think there was even a single example of someone saying, "Hey kid, we saw you on the Ignatz and now we want to do something with you." It was definitely more.
And they would call you kid. Hey kid.
Yeah. That's what all publishers say when they approach, talent. But I think what the nomination did was give me the sense that maybe I was on the right track. It gave me some confidence that I didn't have before. And not that, awards are everything or even necessary. But I think for me, being so new to comics and being kind of uncertain about, did I do the right thing? Spending all this money on grad school and leaving my career of filmmaking to go into comics. Was it the right thing? And that little nudge was enough to say, like, just keep doing what you're doing. It seems like you're headed in the right direction. And even beyond that, I think it gave me a sense of what types of stories that I create tend to resonate with people. Because Trevor was one of those things where I really wanted to tell this silly story, but it also felt like I was betraying this sort of more serious auteur kind of like way of approaching work, trying to do these very like sophisticated, mind-blowing comics. But then something like Trevor that was a little bit just more personal and less so that way ended up resonating with people more. And I think that's because they could feel that it was something that was coming out of a more personal place. So it sort of gave me license to keep doing the kind of stories that I actually wanted to do.
That's interesting because I've wondered what something like a nomination to an award of this sort, what kind of attention that might bring to the creator, especially those who are just starting off, and not many people may know who they are. I mean, right. I know especially with the Ignatz over the past few years, in the Promising New Talent category, and especially, Best Mini Comic, I guess, the majority of those names I had not seen before. And so one positive thing to come from just being nominated is that people like me will see a name and then be more apt to recognize it on down the road when we see other work, or think, there's someone, they got nominated for a reason. I'll have to watch out for her and see what kind of work that she does or he does.
Right. Absolutely. I think that is definitely a benefit of it, and I think there's this understanding that the nomination in an Ignatz Award is just as valuable or as important as the win itself, because of the nature of how the Ignatz is. It's a juried nomination process, meaning there are specific people in the industry, other creators who are looking through this like giant mass of stuff and then whittling down their like top 2 choices in every category, that kind of thing. And so it is like a very real honor that of all those things, yours happens to be something that they feel like is worth putting out on the nomination table. And not that winning is invaluable too. Winning's amazing, but I think anyone who gets a nomination should feel proud of it.
Mm-hmm. For the past 2 years, we've devoted an entire episode of the Comics Alternative to discuss the Ignatz nominees. I mean, winners, but I think we're much more interested in the nominations for the reasons that you mentioned, that the nominees are chosen by a jury, which is different from the selection of the winners, which is a popularity vote. I mean, let's just say it. I mean, people vote who are in attendance, and if someone is able to have a lot of fans there voting, that's Saturday of the first day of SPX, right, then they're going to get that. And you could even tell going to the ceremonies, right, when someone's name is announced, how loud is the applause in the room?
Chances are,
yes, that gives you an indication who will probably be named as the winner in a few moments. But and there's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But again, I'm much more interested in who's nominated than who's won.
Yeah, and I think both kind of are different recognitions. The jury thing is this kind of recognition that people, other creators and that are specifically selected to be on the jury find something valuable in your work. That's really great. Mm-hmm. And then on the winning side, it's sort of like maybe your name is starting to gain traction, or your work is visible enough that people want to check your name on the nomination box, and that's sort of like another recognition of like, we could call it popularity contest, which in a sense it is, but it's also like being popular, or your work being popular is it's a very important part about where we aim to go as creators, because without our work, we want our work to be seen and respected by as many people as possible. So being able to have people like there on Saturday who want to check your name on the box is like an accomplishment. Mm-hmm. I definitely don't feel like I'm there yet where where enough people would recognize me that I could like, get into that next stage.
You mentioned a moment ago your work in film, and I'm wondering, well, I guess a couple things. One, what was it like to make that career choice, or the transition between working in film and then comics? But perhaps even more interestingly, how did your work with film impact, or does it maybe continue to influence the way you approach comics?
Yeah, I think about that a lot. The moving from film to comics aspect was somewhat serendipitous, because I had been working with a company, and they had gone under around the 2010 crash that happened, the sort of pseudo depression that we were going through then. Mm-hmm. And that sort of led, around the end of 2010 to the company having to let most people go. And so suddenly I found myself out of a job, and I was sort of floundering, trying to figure out, where I wanted to go next, how I wanted to direct my ambitions in film, which was personally trying to be a filmmaker, but also realizing I needed to do things more on the commercial side to make a living. and a decent living. Unlike comics, which is, a little harder to make a living. I miss that filmmaking money. But, so, I had never really grown up reading comics, or drawing, because I was always very self-conscious about my drawing as early as 10 years old. So there was just this random suggestion from my wife that I just try doing something like comics, because I had recently, that year, started, reading a lot of graphic novels, getting copies of Best American Comics and stuff, and just really getting into it. And she said, well, why don't you try doing this while you're searching for a job, just so you don't go crazy. It's another medium where you can tell a visual story. And that sort of led to me suddenly being like, holy cow, I'm doing this, and I really feel passionate about it. I suddenly feel enabled to tell stories on my own without having to fall back on all the things standing in your way when you want to make a film, film crews, actors, lighting, budget, all that kind of stuff. If I have paper and pen, I can tell a story. The only limitation is my ability to draw and my willingness to draw, which is, coming from the film industry into that, is a huge feeling of empowerment. And so to answer your second part of that question, which is, how does film sort of inform how I approach comics or inform my work? I think it's unavoidable at this point, spending so much time learning about the visual language of storytelling through film, that I automatically start transposing that onto my comics. And it's not that I'm necessarily trying to make my comics look like a film, but I definitely am always thinking, like, this is a film I would have liked to make, and now I get a chance to make it, but in drawing form. So there's a lot of leaning back on some of the storytelling tools that I got from film, for sure.
Well, I mean, now that you have been doing comics for a while, do you have any interests in taking these comics and turning them into films, perhaps animation?
The animation side is so terrifying to me because it just seems like, making comics is such a labor-intensive thing, and animation seems like that on steroids, in terms of time commitment and that kind of thing. I do sometimes think about how there is an itch, a film itch, that remains unscratched. And I think that's just because as much as comics has so much powerful and beautiful things about it, there is something about film where you have the inclusion of not only visuals but also sound, that I still feel like I would love to do someday. I don't know if I feel strong necessarily about adapting something I've made into film, although that has been something that, like, a few people have said, you should try doing that, because I have a lot of friends in the film industry, and I'm open to that idea. But I definitely feel like I would love to, at some point, have license to go back and try to make some films, make some more short films like I used to do.
So, you mentioned that you were, you lost your job with the film company, and it was at that point, after your wife recommended that you try comics for a while, that you enrolled in the Center for Cartoon Studies?
Yes, that's right. Yeah, so I lost my job in February of 2011, and then started doing this comic thing. And after 2 months, I was applying to the school, and the fall of 2011, I was enrolled. So it was a very intense and quick turnaround.
Yeah. We've had a number of people on the show who attended Center for Cartoon Studies.
Yeah, I mean, I could sing its praises. obviously I'm biased because I attended the school and now I teach there and work there. So, I have a lot of great things to say about it, but I'm not surprised. I personally feel like this school is a great place to, for a certain type of person to hone their skills. It's not an essential thing to be a great comic maker, but for some people, it is just what they need.
Now, you're teaching there now. Do you consider your job at Center for Cartoon Studies your day job, or would you consider your comics work your day job, or both?
I kind of just feel like I have two full-time jobs. Okay. I've got my full-time job at the Center for Cartoon Studies, and I feel very passionate about what I'm able to be a part of there. But I'm not willing to relinquish my own comics making for that. So I end up being very rough on myself sometimes by, working 40 hours a week at the Center for Cartoon Studies and then trying to also put in 40 hours a week or ending up putting that kind of time into my comics on the side. So whether I feel like one is more more the day job and one is more the real job, I don't really know, but I think working at the school sort of enables me to not have to make that choice as much because it's all comics. Well, so comics is my job. That's what I like to think about it as.
So let's talk a bit about your work, Our Mother, which came out around the time of SPX. Now, this is published by Retrofit Big Planet, which I've said often on the Comics Alternative, this has quickly become one of our favorite small presses. So you're in great company there. But reading Our Mother, it strikes me that this is a much, much more personal work than Talk Dirty to Me in your other shorter comics.
Yeah, I can't believe how personal it ended up being. Even though there's a lot of fictional elements, obviously, because it's such a kind of fantastical tale that's not really based in reality in terms of what's happening on the page. Emotionally, it might as well be an autobiographical comic.
Now, you said that it turned into something very personal when you began this story. Did you not intend to do that?
I think I wanted to sit down and make a story that was, what does it feel like for a kid to grow up with a parent that is struggling with some kind of emotional disorder, like an anxiety disorder or depression? And, my approach to making comics is very not script based. It's the whole what is happening in the story, the dialogue and the visuals themselves are all kind of happening at once. And so in a way, the story started coming out onto the page much more intimately than I expected it to. I thought, I'm going to do a kind of comedy about this, which in itself seems like such a hilariously ridiculous thing to try to do, make comedy out of something so unfunny as like emotional disorders. But I sort of wanted to make comedy a sort of barrier between me and having to look too closely at these personal issues. But even though it is based in comedy, I was surprised by how much feeling was coming out of me when I was making these pages. It was a very exhausting and personal process trying to like put these pages down.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely does begin with comedy, because if we don't count the cartoon or the comics with the wood car on the inside front cover, the first bit of Our Mother, the 3 pages, you have a man and a woman who are in a big city going down a dark alley specifically to meet this, I guess, mother figure who's in a hat and trench coat, smoking a cigarette, classic noir, and
Right.
they're there to hire her to mess up their kid's life.
Yeah, they're there. Yeah, I mean, essentially, I was thinking about what it's like as an adult. Around 25, I started developing the same sort of issues that my mom had when she was 25. And the same issue or similar issues to what her parents and her grandfather were dealing with at similar ages. And just being so conscious since 25 and now I'm 33, being so conscious of how much I've like really inherited this awful aspect of the genes that come from my mom, to no fault to her or anyone else. And that's sort of what it feels like, when you're thinking about it, sometimes you're just like, damn it, why? Like you're almost like mad at your at the previous generations for passing this on, even though it's nobody's fault. And that it almost feels like someone's like, like the generations before you have conspired to like hand this thing down to you, like almost like hiring a hit on you or something.
In reading Our Mother, what you just said didn't hit me until the very end. And I'm partly hesitant to talk about what happens at the end because I don't want to give away spoilers. On the other hand, the way that Our Mother is put together, I mean, it's not a linear narrative. So it seems to me you could talk about almost any section of this work, and it kind of stands apart on its own, but you look at it as in its entirety, right? And that's the story, again, a nonlinear story that's being told here. So, if I mention something that you consider a spoiler, let me know. But toward the end, the 2 pages where you have the photographs that you've incorporated, a conversation between, I guess, you and I guess your mother, at least that's the way it comes across to me as a reader. It struck me that the laughing that I had been doing earlier in this book took on an entirely different light in reading those 2 pages.
Yeah, those 2 pages were so unexpected when I first started making the comic. And when I started trying to see where this thing wanted to go in the end, I realized that the story just like wasn't letting me end it. And in part, I think it's just because something like mental disorders, like, me having depression and anxiety, same with my mother, those things just aren't ever really over. You just learn to get better at dealing with them and learning how to like take care of yourself. But those are like just true things about your brain that unfortunately, when it comes to like, clinical depression, clinical anxiety disorders, you kind of live with them like any other unfortunate, defect. And so it didn't feel like I had the ability to just end the story fictitiously without kind of breaking the fourth wall and sort of revealing this aspect of, underneath me trying to tell this fictitious sort of story about all of this, that I was also, in conversation with my mother and, trying to learn more about what it was like for her and thinking more about what it was like for me. And so suddenly in those 2 pages, that fourth wall gets broken and it ended up revealing itself that there was this kind of real conversation happening underneath it all.
Yeah, I've wondered about the use of photographs in comics because every time that they're used, it's a way, it seems to me, of pulling back the veil of fictionality. I mean, even a comic or a graphic novel that tells you it is memoir, it is autobiography, the illustration aspect of it, to some degree, I feel, kind of masks the actual real-life lived experience in some ways, especially when you contrast it to the power of a photograph within the context of a comic. I mean, all of a sudden it seems as if things are stripped away and you get to see the person who's behind the pen, who's putting that comic together. And
Right.
it has a hard impact. And you felt that you needed something like that, the inclusion of those photographs, in order to come to at least a temporary sense of closure, in order to wrap up the book, if nothing else.
Yeah, I think, and even more than actually getting closure, and I guess I feel like this story doesn't have a lot of closure. It just maybe has what I hope is, that it ends with the sense of like that there's hope or progress to be had. But I felt like those 2 pages, the photo pages, ended up happening to kind of illustrate the fact that, or me, I don't know, me wanting to say to the reader, like, yeah, this is a fictional story on one level. This is a guy, but the kid character itself is a woman. Underneath it, I'm still here. Like I'm actually here. And anyone who's the story might resonate with, they might feel like an acknowledgement that that the person telling this story is going through similar things to them.
And you do end on, I don't know if we would call it an upbeat note or maybe more of a funny note than anything, the farting hot dog.
Yeah.
Great way of ending the story.
Yeah, and probably like the only way it could have ended, because I didn't feel comfortable making some kind of conclusion about mental disorder, because I just don't feel like I have any conclusions. I essentially feel like the farting hot dog, which is, it's just so funny that we're saying farting hot dog right now, but that the farting hot dog was like a great emblematic illustration of what it feels like often day to day, just being like, almost like shrugging your shoulders or throwing your hands up in the air and being like, oh, well, got to keep working on this, got to keep dealing with this, but I don't have the answers yet. And that felt like the only way I could end the story in good confidence.
Well, is your mother still around?
Yes, she is. Yeah.
Okay, so this dialogue in that 2-page photographic section that you're having with her, did you have something like this conversation with her off page in real life?
Yeah, and we spoke a lot because, I knew this was the first story where I was going to actually be pulling in a lot of inspiration and information from something from my personal life. And I wanted to check with my mom to make sure that was okay with her, but I wanted to get a better sense of some of the details, because as much as my mom and I are very close, I still feel like I have held back from trying to explore what that was like for my mom more, because it scares me. Growing up as a kid, it was it was just like a very hard thing to witness. And so I think I preferred to kind of ignore it whenever I could. So I wanted to start having those conversations with my mom. And I think it also, after the comic came out and she read it, that really ignited some very serious conversations. Not always pleasant, but, valuable, I think.
So what we're seeing on those 2 pages toward the very end, where, the photographic you is having a conversation with your photographic mother, that's something that didn't take place, that conversation or something like that, until after the publication of the comic.
No, something like that. That actually is very, very closely based on a phone conversation I had with my mom right around that point in drawing the story. Where I actually did call up my mom because I was having trouble ending the story, and we had a very similar conversation. But a lot of the more intense conversations about the whole book itself happened afterwards. Yeah.
Now, you had mentioned that there's something autobiographical about this, but would you consider Our Mother an autobiographical comic?
I think it just exists in that ambiguous void between fiction and autobiographical. I think that if I were to look at the emotions of the story, then I think it's autobiographical. When I was having conversations with my mom after the story, and she said, like, this isn't what really happened, or I'm worried that you feel this way about me or something. My explanation to her, which I think, helped a lot for both of us, was the sense that this isn't, there's not a lot of literal things in this story. It's all like emotional metaphor. And I think in that way, how those scenes happen, how they make you feel, is very accurate to how I felt as a kid. So in that sense, it does feel autobiographical. But at the same time, obviously, there were never giant robots or farting hot dogs or like a gorilla. So it can't be entirely autobiographical.
Yeah, you're mentioning the fantastical elements of Our Mother, and that leads me to another question, which is the vignette aspect and the way that you've constructed Our Mother. You said a moment ago that you feel comfortable working in vignettes, and even though everything that goes on in Our Mother gives it a sense and a feeling of cohesion, it's made up of individual components, and I'm wondering if that's something that you planned to do with this book from the very beginning, or did that kind of vignette-leaning side of you just decide as you were doing this to go that route?
I think that aspect was the only planned thing, which was I knew that I wanted to do a story where none of the pieces necessarily made a lot of sense on their own. I'm really interested in disjointed narrative. I feel very comfortable coming out of film that I have the ability to do the traditional like 3-act structure, or doing a very good like 0% to 100% storytelling with all the character arcs and that kind of stuff. But so what really interests me is the challenge of trying to tell a story through the disjointed narrative, which I feel like is also a lot more accurate to how at least I experience life, where it feels like there are lots of little moments and they don't necessarily make a lot of sense or come together very cleanly in this sort of beginning, middle, and end sort of fashion.
Mm-hmm. Now, did you set out to structure these individual stories that, you're right, by themselves don't seem to make sense, or at least much sense, but then when you put them together within the context of one another, then you do see a larger narrative of, come to the fore. So did you have a particular way that you wanted to structure, part A, part B, part C?
Yeah, I think I looked at the whole story and thought about, what does the journey feel like of a child going through this with their parent? So in that sense, there is that kind of aspect of, what is the spectrum of emotions, or the beginning, middle, and end of telling that sort of story, but then just choosing, that, okay, there's this part, this is what it feels like when you have a disorder that just won't go away, and it just keeps coming back over and over and over again. As much as you feel like you've done something to banish it forever, it'll still come back. And then I'd find a story that felt like it was representative of that specific aspect. And so all the vignettes kind of are designed as like are taking over a section of what it really feels like.
And the illustration style is different among the different vignettes.
Yeah. And I think that's in part because I'm not someone who's very, at least not yet, someone who's very married to a specific style of drawing. And maybe it's because drawing is not like what I come naturally to. It's not something I grew up doing. Maybe I'm doing a lot of the work that you would do as a kid if you like continued to draw. Like a lot of my peers who drew comics all growing up, they do a lot of that experimentation. They ape different styles and look at a bunch of different stuff, and then eventually that coalesces into a unique drawing style. And for me, I feel like I'm still doing the experimentation, exploration. And as soon as I do something in one specific style for a really long time, I start to get bored. I start to feel not as engaged with the work. It feels like I'm just sort of slogging through it. That was probably the one difficult thing about making Talk Dirty to me, was trying to stick to one style for 120 pages was a lot more difficult.
Now, I think that I'm noticing in Our Mother a sense of symmetry in the way that everything is put together, but I'm not sure if I'm reading too much into the structure of the story. Is there something symmetrical to Our Mother?
Yeah, I think so. I think after I went through that process that we just talked about of planning out the story and what vignettes would represent what things, there was definitely a conscious effort to balance it out, so that it felt even. It felt like you were getting a exposed to these vignettes at various times, so that it felt balanced. And I think symmetry is probably a good word. I had never really thought about it specifically as like, I want to make this symmetrical, but I did want to make it feel even.
Right. And, it's not as if this is something like we would find in, say, Fearful Symmetry, right? But, I mean, if you look at the first half of Our Mother, in some ways, not completely, it mirrors the second half.
Interesting.
And that's why I was wondering if I'm reading too much into this, because, and I first thought of this when I saw the very first and the very last comic, and the inside front cover, there's the wooden car, which looks very similar to the section at the very end, the last comic on the inside back cover with the farting hot dog. And so I thought, okay, I wonder if there's something structured and even symmetrical about this. And I didn't notice it completely to a T, but it's maybe semi-symmetrical or a mirror image, because the very center of the story is, and I don't know which one this is, but it's the young girl with a woman who can't speak.
Right.
It's that story. And then if you look from the center going back to the front, and then from the center going to the back, there is something of a rhythm going back and forth between one vignette and the other.
Yeah, I think maybe some of that is a happy accident, but also I think some of that is symptomatic of the fact that I had this sort of sense that whenever I was onto one section, one vignette in the story, that when that section would come to an ending for that point, I would definitely get a sense of like what feels most right to happen next. What vignette have I not returned to in a while? That kind of thing. So I think sort of just the human nature of wanting things to be balanced and symmetrical definitely led to the sense of like of stories sort of happening at similar points, going into the story and then going out again.
Okay, so this year, 2016, you've had, two books, Talk Dirty to Me back in June from AdHouse, and then Our Mother, which came out in August from Retrofit Big Planet. What project are you working on now?
I'm doing another short piece for another small press. I'm not sure I'm allowed to specifically talk about it, but so that's going to be something that's of a similar length to Our Mother. That will hopefully come out next year. And then I'm working on this ongoing project that's a longer form graphic novel that's sort of more in the sci-fi realm, and touches on a lot of the issues that Our Mother does in some ways. And that is something that I was originally working as a pitch for AdHouse, but then things shifted and Chris caught wind of Talk Dirty to Me and said he'd be happy for publishing that. So that longer graphic novel is what I plan to spend, the next year or two working on, and hopefully, taking it somewhere. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, will this new longer form work be more overtly autobiographical?
No, I think it will be less. There's some very specific autobiographical stuff that I really want to do, specifically surrounding my parents' divorce. My father was a test pilot in the Air Force, and he was actually kicked out of the Air Force for being gay, and that sort of really dramatically impacted our family, and that led to my parents splitting up. And there's just a lot of personal childhood issues surrounding those specific dramas of having a father that's gay but closeted, and being in the military where he and growing up in an era where you're not encouraged to explore the idea of homosexuality. That all is something I feel like I really want to address at some point in a very specifically autobiographical format. But I also feel like I don't know if I'm ready for that. Maybe I need to do a lot more therapy before I can address it, but so that's sort of that's the graphic novel that I forecast, that's maybe 5 years out or 10 years out from now.
Wow. Ambitious. Yeah. And now you were at SPX just the other week. Where can people meet up with you at future conventions?
I'm going to be at Crossroads, which is the one in Columbus. So that's happening in not this weekend, but next weekend, or so October 14th, 15th, and 16th, I believe.
Right.
And then maybe at Mice, I may be jumping on a friend's table at Mice, or at least going down there to trade comics and meet people. And then I think from there it's going to be a break from conventions for a while, probably until the spring, when things like TCAF and Cake and Mocha, that kind of thing, starts coming down the pike.
Yeah, my co-host Andy is going to CXC in another week or so, and I wish that I could go, but I'm not going to be able to. So I hope you get to meet Andy.
Yeah, I would love that. And they just have a crazy lineup this year. There's so many amazing people. I really hope I get a chance to meet Seth and Ben Catcher are two that heroes that I would love to shake the hand of. But also, I think more than anything, I finally am going to get a chance to see the Billy Ireland collection. That library and museum there. I've just heard so many amazing things about.
Yeah, I've got to get up there as well.
Yeah, I will send you some photos.
Yeah, I look forward to seeing those, and maybe they're photos you can incorporate in a new comic at some point.
Yeah, I'm not averse to it.
Yeah. Well, Luke, I want to thank you for taking the time and being on the Comics Alternative. It's been a lot of fun.
Thanks, Derek. This is a real honor.
So there you have it, my conversation with Luke Howard. I want to send out a big old thank you to Luke again for taking the time and being on the Comics Alternative podcast. But you know, I found out after our interview that this was not the first time that Luke Howard has been on the Comics Alternative. I did a little digging and I found that a couple of years ago at the SPX 2014 event, one of our co-hosts, Andy Wolverton, briefly spoke with Luke Howard, and if you want to listen to that episode, it came out on September 15th of 2014. It's episode number 100.2. That's right, 100.2. It was still at the time that we were doing the point system in the numbering of our episodes. So you may want to check that out. But I had a very good time talking with Luke in a fresh manner about his two new books, Our Mother and Talk Dirty to Me. And speaking of which, if you want to find great discounts on these books, then you should head on over to Discount Comic Book Service, where right now you can find Our Mother at 30% off of the cover price. Now, unfortunately, you cannot find Talk Dirty to Me on dcbservice.com, but if you head over to our website, comicsalternative.com/Amazon, and you click on that image of me and Andy Kunka looking over the Amazon sign, then it'll take you right to Amazon.com, do a search for Luke Howard, get Talk Dirty with Me there. You'll get a great discount, plus you'll be helping out the Comics Alternative. So whether you get your fix of Luke Howard through Discount Comic Book Service or Amazon.com, you're helping us out, and you're helping out Luke as well. And after you do get your comics at those places, get in touch and let us know what you think about my conversation with Luke Howard. If you go to our website, comicsalternative.com, you'll find that you can leave us a voice message through the wonders of SpeakPipe, which is a really easy program to use. Or you can call us the old-fashioned way. Our phone number is 4153-COMICS. That's 415-326-6427. You can also email us. We're 2guys@comicsalternative.com, or you can contact me directly. I'm Derek at comicsalternative.com. And you can find us all over social media, such as on Facebook, Twitter, Tumblr, Instagram, Google+, Goodreads, Pinterest, and YouTube. You can subscribe to the podcast through iTunes. You can stream us on Stitcher. You can find us on TuneIn, on Spotify, and on iHeartRadio. And if you're an Android user, you can even find us on Google Play Music. But you can still find every single one of our podcast episodes, as well as the many reviews and comics-related commentaries that we post on our blog, by going to our website, comicsalternative.com. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Luke Howard, and you come back to this same place for more Comics Alternative goodness. Until then, take care.